Believe it or not, death metal, at least lyrically, goes back almost 30 years. Most critics agree that it goes back to Venom, their first album, Welcome to Hell, in 1981. So that's about 30 years of ground to cover. So in my opinion, it pretty much starts with Venom and Slayer and maybe Exodus. They're lyrically in the territory of evil, psychopaths, war. And so what you hear in a lot of death metal lyrics to this day are just kind of unpleasant things discussed, often related to death. Often metaphorical, sometimes not, sometimes intentionally shocking, sometimes highly personal. Now, the band Death formed in the early 80s, and they began doing this very juvenile stuff that was in the vein of, early Venom or Slayer. It was just shocking people. It had all this gore. It was like it came out of a horror movie. And then by the early 90s, what they changed to was very philosophical. It reflected Chuck Schuldiner's views on life and death and states in between. Like, there was this song, Together as One, about Siamese twins, about what it would be to live as two people joined, into one body. Gruesome. People don't want to think about it, but that's what metal often does. It provokes us. You may not like necessarily what you're listening to, but if it gets people thinking a little bit deeper about the world around them, then those are some pretty good heavy metal lyrics. And speaking of thought-provoking, there's Carcass. The first couple albums that Carcass did, I'd say Recaputrefaction, Symposium of Sickness, and Necroticism, Descanting the Insalubrious. Those albums are full of medical terminology. You'd probably need to have a heavy grip of grasp of Latin to understand what they're discussing. But here are vegetarians that are talking about the flesh, whether it's human or animal. And a friend of mine, translated it from the Latin, essentially, put it into plain English for me, and I couldn't believe what they were saying. It was just really profound. And what's another good example? I guess, so themes of death can also be tackled from religious perspectives. There's the band Mortification from Australia, and the death that they address the most often is the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And death has been addressed in many different ways. It's often from a secular point of view, in an individualistic way. Very little, there's not a spiritual viewpoint to it in metal very often. You'll see it. Sometimes it's within a rather secular context, sometimes it's explicitly Christian or some other religion. But that's one of the things that has kept me coming back to metal. It's a forum for discussion, for philosophy. It's, to a lot of people, it's just adrenaline and loud noise. But if that's all there was to it, I wouldn't still be listening to it 20 years later. So I'm hoping other people might be inspired to dig a little bit deeper if they're already listening to something, and maybe not just have the typical Beavis and Butthead reaction. Loud. This is evil. You know what I'm saying?
We'll see how metal you look with this close-up of No Doubt right behind you.
She's just a girl. She's just a girl in this world. That's all that they'll let. That's all that they'll let her be.